Hey everyone, it's the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I am Anthony Cosenza and I'm joined by my co-host Scott Schulze. And for the second week in a row, we get to talk about a Bengals win. Last week we kind of said it ironically that the Bengals handed it to the Browns and yay, they got their first win. But this was an important game this week against the Buffalo Bills, a team that came into Cincinnati 3-1, and the Bengals they hung tough in a lot of different elements. We're going to talk about that and analyze a few key points on that win for the Bengals as they head into the Week 6 bye week. We're also going to talk. Scott has some interesting questions. Usually he does a weekly feature at cincyjungle.com behind enemy lines, but this week he has graciously asked me some of my thoughts on certain aspects of the Bengals team. We'll talk about that for his weekly feature. We also are taking fantasy football questions. We are bringing back our fantasy football spotlight with our expert, Scott Schulze. So send us your questions. We've already got a few. Send us your questions in the live YouTube chat, in the comment thread at cincyjungle.com, or on Twitter at BengalsOBI. We'll be monitoring all of those. And we also have, we're going to try and get to some listener questions as well towards the end of the program. Scott, before we get to some breaking news, how are you, sir? Are you feeling a little better about the club now that they're 2-3 heading into the bye?
Personally, I'm still a little drenched. We were at the game on Sunday, and I was expecting any minute to see Noah's Ark come floating by. That was a very watery Hurricane Nate rain-soaked game. So I think my shoes are still wet from 3.5 days ago.
So you went?
Yeah. Me and my wife were there.
Okay.
And still drying out from it.
Yeah, as much fun as it is to watch them live, and especially for me, living where I live and going to that stadium and seeing them with a bunch of other Bengals fans, that didn't look too fun to me in terms of the conditions to sit there and watch a game. So hopefully you guys brought the ponchos, some rain wicking gear. But did you have a good time?
Yeah, we enjoyed it. It was my wife's first game. She came away, despite all the rain, despite the nonstop deluge that pretty much ran all day long. She came away really enjoying it, and I think she'd be interested in going to another one. And there's something for being at the game you just can't replace. I mean, the camaraderie, the cheering, everyone's high-fiving everyone around them, and just the whole atmosphere is something that is obviously very hard to be. And of course, when they're winning, I mean, it's good. It's a close game, exciting game. You went back and forth. They ended up winning, and the Bills fans were pretty good. They were vocal, so it was fun having them in the stadium. And
New Yorkers, come on now.
But a little bit like not what you picture with like the Jets or Giants or something. Right. So it was, but yeah, it was all in all, it was a very good game. We enjoyed it. I may have to get new shoes if those never dry out, but. So one more thing in the cost, obviously tickets are money and parking, and you don't expect shoes to be part of the cost.
Yeah, you don't. But that's kind of what you deal with as you go to a live game. And again, we'll talk about the Bills game in just a few minutes. There's a lot to talk about. I'm glad you had a good time. Scott, in typical Bengals fashion, just when we think things are getting better, just when we think things are turning around and there's positive news, guess what? There's something negative. And breaking earlier this afternoon and then into this evening, and if you're listening to this podcast a little later, we record Wednesday evenings, so this may be a little bit of old news to you if you don't tune into us live at YouTube or Cincy Jungle. But Tyler Eifert earlier in the day was seeing a specialist in LA for his back, which he had missed the last couple of games this year. And if you remember, he had off-season back surgery already before this season started. So there were some reports from Adam Schefter and others saying that he is contemplating back surgery. Well, Scott, he has opted, according to reports, early reports, I don't want to say it's completely official, but early reports from some reputable sources like Adam Schefter say that he is going to undergo a back surgery again and miss 4 to 6 months. So that is going to end his season. Now, there's a couple of questions that come with this news, and I want to start here. Tyler Eifert is entering free agency this next year. Obviously, he's a talented guy, and he brings an element to this Bengals offense that really they hadn't had for quite some time. Even when they used the high pick on Jermaine Gresham and other players, he just really, he can stretch the field. He can get across the middle. He can hit be very effective in the red zone. He's made a Pro Bowl. The guy can't stay healthy. I mean, even in the Pro Bowl, he hurts his ankle and has to recover from that. So now the Bengals have a big decision on their plate. Obviously, they can let him walk. They can say, you know what, talented player, we don't want to let him walk, but he's had a number of surgeries. He's missed a ton of games. And really, we've had the one long tenured, outstanding statistical season from him since they drafted him in 2013. So they can let him walk. They can franchise tag him, which is an expensive gamble. But as we know, the Bengals don't do much in free agency, and they always seem to be under the cap. They've re-signed Vontaze Burfict long-term. A.J. Green was a contract they got done, I believe, last offseason. So they've got a lot of core guys under contract. They've managed the salary cap. So Tyler Eifert, a franchise tag, they could do that even though it's a little expensive and risky. Or they can sign him long-term with an incentive-laden deal, which he might opt for given his injury history and, all of that. So, Scott, this is big news for the Bengals and unfortunate news for the Bengals for 2017, but it also brings a cloudy future. What would you do if you were in that front office, given, those are the three options you have with this guy, now hearing he's having another back surgery?
I think it'd be very hard for them to do the franchise tag only because, like you said, you're paying a lot of money to a guy that you don't know how good is he going to be when he comes back? How long is that timetable for recovery? Being that this isn't his first injury, is this something where it's going to take him a while to recover? Is he not going to be 100%, until the middle of next season? What kind of Eifert are you going to get? And are they a team that's going to want to pay that much money for a guy that you don't know if he's going to come back that well? And if he does come back, is he going to get hurt again? So I'm assuming I can't imagine they would go the extension route unless they can get him on a very team-friendly, low guaranteed money, kind of like what they did with Andy Dalton as far as other quarterback salaries or contracts at the time. When they signed it, it was a very team-friendly deal because there wasn't a lot guaranteed, but it was able to pay him a decent amount and lock him up. I could see them pursuing something like that with Eifert, but I'm assuming Eifert would probably just be willing to test the market and see what he can get. And if you look at what tight ends around the league are getting, even though he's been hurt as much as he's been hurt, I think he probably gets a decent chunk of money from somebody. I don't know if it'd be the Bengals, but I think Eifert would probably be inclined to test the market. And you look at some of the higher contracts right now for tight ends as far as their base annual salary. The top few are Jimmy Graham, Jason Witten, Greg Olsen, obviously guys who have been very good, very productive. The next guy, Kobe Fleener, never really did a whole lot in Indianapolis, went down to the Saints. They're paying him almost $6 million a year. The next guy, Julius Thomas, who got a big contract because he had Peyton Manning throwing to him 1 year. Kyle Rudolph, the decent tight end. The next guy is actually Tyler Eifert. He's ranked 7th overall, making almost $5 million a year. So kind of looking at those producers, those salaries, he's probably, I would say the market for him is probably going to be in the $5+ million range. I'm assuming someone would give him that. I don't know if the Bengals would match it only because they have Tyler Kroft and CJ Uzomah. And then that kind of brings the question, well, how good of a replacement are they? Because Eifert's, he's probably the best receiving tight end the Bengals have had since Rodney Holman. And, that's going back like 30 years. They've had some good, good blockers, decent people, but no one like Tyler Eifert. And as much as you would hate to see him go, I think the ideal situation would be something if they could get him to sign like a 1-year prove-it deal. If he goes on the open market and no one's paying him anything, if people are just too scared from the injuries, I could see the Bengals maybe coming in, giving him something a little better than what the other teams are. But if someone really wants him and overpays and gives him, 6, 7, 8 million, then he's probably gone. I think at that point, the Bengals let him go, because I can't imagine them paying that much for a guy who has that much of an injury history, especially since there's really been no rumors of them talking extension with him. And generally, when they have a guy that's getting this close to free agency, you would have thought somewhere last year, somewhere this offseason, somewhere this year, there'd be at least rumors that, hey, they're discussing an extension. They're talking about it. And there really hasn't been. It's been pretty silent on that front. So it kind of makes you think the Bengals probably aren't looking at offering him a ton of money, which makes you think he's probably going to test the open market or the free market, and we'll just see what happens at that point.
Yep, he's never played 16 regular season games in his entire career. He played 15 regular season games in 2013 and the playoff game. He missed almost all of basically the entire 2014 season with his elbow deal. Played basically a quarter against the Baltimore Ravens that year in the opener. Missed all of that year. Missed 3 games in 2015 where he made the Pro Bowl, or when he made the Pro Bowl. 3 games there. Did play in the playoff game there. 2016, last year, missed 8 games. Now he's set to at least miss 14 regular season games this year, and if the Bengals make the postseason, more there. So, I mean, you look at it. I'm just kind of doing some rough math here. 16, 19, 35, and another 15. It's more. His games that he's missed are now more than he's played, and far more than the 20 touchdowns he has scored as a Cincinnati Bengal. So, to me, if they resign him, I think I'm tempted to say do the franchise thing, because at some point maybe he'll get healthy, and even if he still is that guy that can only play 12 to 13 games. Look, this position is one of the toughest in the NFL, because you have to block, which is a physical aspect of the sport. You have to go across the middle and take hits. That's a physical aspect of the sport. You have to run, you have to cut, you have to do all these things. A lot of things are asked of tight ends that aren't asked of many other positions on the field. So it's a grind. And even Rob Gronkowski, known as the best in the NFL, he's had back issues. He's had knee issues. He's had broken bones. So, this position takes a toll. And unfortunately, that's kind of the thing. I don't lean to a long-term deal unless it's completely team-friendly, like you said, Scott. I lean more franchise tag, or unfortunately, as much as I like him as a person, as much as I like him as a player, you almost got to say, you know what, we can't rely on you. We just can't. And, I don't know exactly what the team is going to do at this point. I mean, obviously you got IR him. Maybe they call somebody up on the free agency wire as kind of a Band-Aid. We'll talk a little bit more about in just a second about some of the guys currently on the roster that will be called upon to replace Eifert. But big blow to the offense, I think. Unfortunately for Bill Lazor, you would think that he was looking forward to having John Ross and Tyler Eifert, 2 of his more exciting and better weapons in this offense. John Ross hasn't been there since Bill Lazor took over as the offensive coordinator, nor has Eifert, and now he's not going to have Eifert the entire year. So we'll see. A very talented player, but just can't stay healthy. Scott, you have one more point you want to add before I ask you another question on this situation.
You mentioned John Ross, and that got me thinking about first-round picks in this team, and it just seems like they either draft them hurt or they get hurt. So I decided to take a quick peek and see, okay, is it as bad as it seems, or I'm just kind of blowing this out of proportion? We can kind of go back a dozen years. David Pollock, first-round pick, 2005, played pretty much one season, hurt his neck, never played again. A few years later, we draft Andre Smith. every year comes in training camp, out of shape, overweight, keeps breaking his foot because he's putting all that weight on it. He misses his first couple seasons, barely plays. A few years after that, you have Tyler Eifert. Obviously, you mentioned he's been hurt more than he's actually played. And then, a couple years later, we draft Cedric Ogbuehi, who missed the whole, his first year because he was hurt. The year after that, William Jackson gets hurt in training camp. He misses his whole first year. And then this year, of course, you have John Ross, who they drafted kind of knowing he was hurt, kind of like the Ogbuehi thing. And so it's, 3 years in a row, 4 of the last 5 first-round picks, and, 6 or 7 who pretty much either were drafted hurt and missed time or were drafted and got hurt, or pretty much just had very shortened careers. And you can even go back if you want to go far enough to like Kajana Carter, and that they just, for whatever reason, this team just seems to, if they draft you in the first round, just just pray that if you're not hurt, you're not going to get hurt.
A lot of good points by you, as well as in our live YouTube chat. Andrew Seiler saying we needed Eifert. I'm sitting alone in my room in tears right now. If I hope that's semi-sarcastic. If it's not, seek help. Royal Flush 513, back injuries linger. It's not worth the risk. That's a great point, because back issues do tend to stick around with people, and anyone, even non-athletes who have had back issues, can attest to that. I see Bill Williams saying Eifert is super talented but not worth a big contract unless it's heavily performance incentive laden. So among those statements and comments there, I'm seeing a lot of people who are talking about Tyler Kroft, who in the absence of Tyler Eifert has stepped up. He had 2 touchdown catches against the Browns, as well as having a couple of nice first down conversions and things of that nature against the Bills. He's looked better than he here. CJ Uzoma, it's kind of been the reverse. He really stepped up last year. Hasn't done so much this year. He's been a little hurt though. So now it's those guys. It's Sethan Carter, who had a big drop on Sunday against the Bills, that are currently on the roster. Ryan Hewitt is nicked up. What's your confidence level now in this Bengals offense now that Eifert seems to be out for the season?
I think for me, it's I'm just going to say it's not really changed, only because I don't think a lot of folks had confidence he was going to be playing all 16 games this year. So, and I think also seeing what Tyler Kroft has done. I mean, his targets, he had 1 target in the first 2 weeks. He's now seen 4, 7, and 5 the last 3 weeks, including 2 touchdowns. So I think the idea that, hey, we have a tight end who seems to be, serviceable, seems to be doing a decent job filling in. Obviously isn't Tyler Eifert, but, he is a Tyler, and he does a decent job. And I think just kind of going in the season, kind of, you realize that this is a guy who was always hurt. We don't know how long we're going to have him. We'd love to have him 16 games. As you mentioned, it's never happened. He hasn't had a healthy season probably since he was at Notre Dame. So you just kind of know that, anything you get from his bonus. And so now we just kind of know that bonus is gone. So I can't say it's too big of a letdown, only because, as long as you aim low, you can't be disappointed, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Lowered expectations. For those of you who are in maybe your late 20s and 30s, you probably remember that little Saturday Night Live skit, the Lowered Expectations skit. So if not, go YouTube it. It's pretty funny. Anyway, this doesn't breed a lot of confidence in this offense, and one that has struggled at times, even under Bill Lazor, with consistency, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But even with consistency, there's been dry spells. They can't convert third downs and get some other plays, so that's concerning. However, he's been out of the lineup so much. You're probably, if you're on the offense, you're kind of like, well, it's kind of par for the course. It's no Eifert, so we got to continue to plan the way we've planned without him in the lineup, because he's never there. So I think Kroft, if he continues to do what he's been doing, that'll work. if Uzoma can kind of step up and do some stuff, that'll work. I do think they might look at the free agent wire. There's some talk in the YouTube chat about Gary Barnidge, a guy I liked. He's up there in age. He's an AFC North guy. He made a Pro Bowl, I believe it was the same year Tyler Eifert did. He's kind of accustomed to the tough way of the AFC North. He could be a guy they bring in as a veteran, maybe cut loose Ethan Carter. We'll see, though. We'll see. I think it's so new. It's such new news that it's a lot to digest at the moment. But for those of you who are joining us late and have not heard, Tyler Eifert is expected to undergo season-ending back surgery, expected to be out 4 to 6 months, and then the Bengals have quite a big decision to talk about. Not really right at this moment, but obviously in the offseason when it comes time to think about re-signing Tyler Eifert, just because he's missed so much time, and it's a shame. He's a talented guy. I've met him. He's a nice guy. He's a great guy, and I feel bad for him. But let's just hope for a speedy recovery. And if the Bengals re-sign him, hopefully he comes back and plays at or near the Pro Bowl level that we saw just a couple of years ago. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, joined by Scott Schulze. You can join us live every episode, usually Wednesday evenings is when we record, on YouTube and at cincyjungle.com. We hope you do join us. We like interacting with fans and answering questions on the air, maybe taking some comments that we like on the air as well. So please join us live. If you're unable to, this podcast is on iTunes, is on SoundCloud, and then you can also get the material also on YouTube, Cincy Jungle. So grab that. You can get in touch with us also on Twitter at BengalsOBI, as well as via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We appreciate your feedback and for you tuning in. Well, let's talk about something a little more rosy now, Scott. This is, gosh, I hate to be a Debbie Downer to start the show, but big news. You gotta lead with it. Bills. It was ugly at times. It was very pretty at times. But the Bengals beat the Bills in pretty dramatic fashion, 20-16. The Bills were, I don't want to say heavy favorites or anything like that, but, I listened to radio, talk radio and stuff throughout the week. A lot of people had Bills outright winning the game. And the Bengals stepped up. It was a must-win scenario. They needed to get this one to feel good about themselves before going into the bye week, and obviously hitting a very interesting stretch of games after the bye. So just a couple of observations, initial observations, especially from you since you were at the game, about the Bengals win on Sunday.
Okay, this time I'm going to unmute before I say anything.
Oh, good. I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those games where you didn't really know what to expect when you were there because it was so rainy. And I remember telling my wife going in, well, it'll be a very fast game because they're going to run the ball. The Bills are a running team. The Bengals are going to take the air out of the ball. We're going to run. Yeah, it's going to be pretty quick. And then you go back and look at the stats. Okay, Tyrod Taylor out of nowhere threw the ball 37 times, and Andy Dalton threw the ball 36 times. And I think because of that, every time they passed, my wife kind of nudged me and said, I thought you said they were going to run today. But despite that, you look at, okay, they both threw the ball 36, 37 times, but had very different results. Andy Dalton had 328 yards. Tyler Taylor had half of that, 166 yards.
Yeah.
So, it shows how many, granted, I think we all agree Dalton's not an elite quarterback, but it shows what it is like to have actual receivers on your team and to have a quarterback who's at least, decent. So that was something. And in the game, just being there watching the game, the Bills pretty much didn't look to be as good as a 3-1 team. I don't know if it was the weather. I don't know if they were a paper 3-1 that just had some lucky breaks go their way. I know they won some close games and had some key turnovers in those games to get to 3-1. But they had beaten some good teams, despite not having a whole lot on the offensive side of the ball. But they were, the number one team and scoring defense going in. So I thought this would be a really good test for the Bengals. We're going in against a team that it's pretty much shut down. They the number one scoring defense after playing teams like Atlanta, who is just in the Super Bowl and has a good offense. And they've played some good teams, and they're shutting them down. And so this will be a good test for the Bengals, because before that we had ever since we changed offensive coordinators, we had the Packers. We scored those 2 touchdowns early, and then the offense went flat. And then we had the Browns, and you can't really do anything from the Browns because it's the Browns. It's not a good measuring stick. So I thought this one would be, and this one, I think they passed everything as far as you'd expect, as far as saying, is the offense back? Not are they back, they're going to score 500 points, but yes, they're back. They're a competent offense. It's not the offense we saw in week 1 and 2. I think we can now, at the very least, say the offense we saw in week 1 and 2 is, erased from the board, and we're back to being at least a competent team that should be in every game, and should be, right there winning games or competitive, and not a team that's going to be turning the ball over 5 times and, getting 100 yards total on offense.
Right. And it was a solid day from the Bengals, mostly from the defense. The Bengals kind of made plays when they needed to on offense. And obviously the 77-yard touchdown to AJ Green is the big one that sticks out. Joe Mixon had his first career touchdown as a pro. That was nice to see, but still a lot of things to worry about. The run offense is something to worry about. The Bengals, even though they had 6 sacks on Tyrod Taylor, they still have trouble with those mobile quarterbacks at times, and it showed, especially earlier in the game, closer to the second half, that showed there. I liked what I saw. Randy Bullock had a nice game, including even though it was a chip shot, including a 29-yarder with just a few minutes to play, which gave the Bengals an extended lead, and that's the one they kept. So I saw a lot of things that I liked, especially the fact that they won a game that they needed to win against what may be a mediocre team. We don't know, but it seems as if this is a game that kind of had, I don't know if you want to say a playoff atmosphere. You were there, I don't know, but I think everybody knew that this was a pretty decent Bills team, even though it wasn't pretty how they have been winning games. It was a pretty decent Bills team. The Bengals got it done and got the win. Scott, is this game I don't know if I want to call it a season changer or season saver. I think season changer, we could agree that it would be yes. Season saver, I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's definitely a huge one, because I think if you're 1-4 going in the bye week, you're pretty much saying, okay, we're not making the playoffs. The odds of making it 1-4 are pretty horrible, especially since the first part of our schedule was supposed to be one of the easier parts of the schedule. We've played 4 teams we should have beaten. We've only beaten one of them. We're going to make some wholesale changes. Let's start changing stuff around. Instead, you're 2-3. You've won 2 in a row. Probably could have won 3 in a row. That game in Green Bay, obviously very close, going to overtime. Definitely changes the dynamic. Changes the locker room, gives you a very positive feel that, hey, those 3 losses, yeah, that's when you can't say anything other than, yeah, that's just horrible. We have those. But that being said, we are going the right direction. We seem to have things figured out. You don't hear about the mutiny in the locker room or whatever we were hearing after the Houston game. Everyone seems to be on the same page. They seem to be together. They seem to go in the right direction. So I think the biggest thing is, as far as the continuity and the presence in the locker room, that everyone's going to be able to say that, yeah, we have a whole week now to gel, to get together, to be positive, to get ready to go into Pittsburgh, to go back to 3-3, and possibly get first place in the AFC North with that game. And that's the biggest thing that, who would have thought 2 weeks ago, this team's 0-3, can't score a touchdown. To think 2 weeks later you might be talking about leading the AFC North in the middle of October.
Right. I think that this game was just, I don't want to say that all of a sudden this means that the team is going to make the playoffs. I don't want to point to that. I don't want to say, this is the right, especially now going into week 6 in the bye week. I don't want to say that, but there is a point if the Bengals get 9 to 10 wins, they sneak into a wild card, they maybe win the division. All of a sudden, you can point to this game and say, wow, that was maybe the turning point of the 2017 season, or the firing of Ken Zampese. That could be another turning point, obviously. But the Bengals are just they're doing the right things. The offense is playing a lot better. The defense is getting after the quarterback. They're doing a lot of things that they didn't necessarily do last year, especially in these last 3 weeks. And it's a much different feeling now than it was just 3 weeks ago when the Bengals were 0-3 and lost that heartbreaker to Green Bay. So I'm kind of with you on this one, Scott. Talking about this, are you worried, even with Lazer's takeover? Now you've got Eifert out for the year, from what we hear. Are you worried about the Bengals offense, even with the improvements that we've seen? Joe Mixon has 2.8 yards per carry on the year. We'll talk more about that. We've already got a fan question on that. Jeremy Hill's at 3.4 yards per carry. They're letting up 3 sacks a game on average. Are you worried about this offense and what they can do the rest of the way?
I'm going to say yes, and it's very hard not to be, because the biggest thing plaguing the offense the first few weeks was the offensive line, and that's still the offensive line we have. It's not like we're, plugging in Andrew Whitworth. We're not bringing back Willie Anderson from retirement or Anthony Munoz. We have who we have, and it's not going to get better. As we play the next 10, 11 games, if anything, it could get worse with injuries and so forth. So the offensive line's probably as good as it's going to get, which isn't very encouraging. The one nice thing was Dalton was only sacked 1 time, but that it seems to be their problem too. Is Dalton? Even though his numbers are getting better somewhat, he still doesn't look like a great quarterback this year. And that was another takeaway my wife had from the game, was after watching some of his throws. She mentioned to me she realized why Dalton wasn't considered an elite quarterback. And after seeing some throws, and I kind of explained what good quarterbacks would do in that situation, and after she just saw what Dalton did, she kind of realizes, oh, okay. And he's leaving points, he's leaving completions on the field. One of the ones that, at least what it looked like at the game, was there was a play where he was about to get sacked, or he had some pressure, and I think the tackle had been pushed into his back, and he felt someone touch him. So instinctively, he does the Dalton thing. He kind of curls up, gets ready to get tackled, finds out it was basically just the back of the offensive lineman pushing on him. And after he, kind of like, oh, I'm still standing. Maybe I can. And then he, I think he threw the ball away or threw a little completion or something. And you look at, what would a great quarterback do in that situation? As soon as they get that pressure, they're moving, they're running forward, you're sidestepping it, they're throwing the ball, they're looking for a receiver, they're not just throwing it out of bounds. And there were several plays where he was scrambling and there were guys open, and he just, throws it out of bounds, either because he can't make the throw or because he is afraid that, I don't know, if whatever it is, maybe he's just trained to throw it out of bounds. And it could be he doesn't think he can make that throw on the run accurately without a defender of it. And so you still have the same offensive line, you still have Dalton. So it's very legit to say that those concerns are still there and they're still going to be there all season. I think the only encouragement I think one can take is this AFC North, for as good as the AFC North generally is, seems to be very down this year. So I don't think it's so much that we're going to suddenly become great on offense, but it's just that the competition doesn't seem to be any better. That I think that's, where the bright light at the end of the tunnel seems to be that, hey, if they're going to have a chance, they may have a chance because they don't seem to have anyone in this division who is ready to run away with it.
Agreed. The Browns obviously are struggling. Pittsburgh lost a big game against the Jaguars at home. Ben Roethlisberger threw 5 interceptions, 2 pick sixes in that game. So the Ravens don't look that great either, even though they beat the Bengals in the opening week on their home turf, 20-0. I'm not really impressed. Even as we speak about the Bengals, I mean, the division itself is a little bit weak. So I think it's kind of ripe for the taking. I don't necessarily agree with you or your lovely wife about Andy Dalton because, at least not this week, because you saw one very catchable pass bounce off out of A.J. Green's arms and turn into an interception. Another that was high, but off of both of his hands, that turned into another interception. And, A.J. Green fumbled the ball away. That's not Andy Dalton's fault necessarily, but he completed a nice pass to him. A.J. Green fumbles the ball away, and, it cost the Bengals points there. Kind of segueing into A.J. Green, what did you make of his performance against the Bills? Because I look at it, and obviously 189 yards on 7 catches, the touchdown. You look at it just on paper, and you go, wow, great day, great day. But those 2 drops, one might not have been his fault. One was most definitely his fault, led to 2 turnovers. He had a turnover of his own in, I believe it was the red zone when he fumbled that ball away. So were you greatly impressed with his afternoon, especially with that 77-yard touchdown and the stout Buffalo pass defense? Or were you kind of saying, gosh, this was a frustrating day because there were so many good plays he had, but so many others that cost the team points and made this game really closer than it should have been?
Yeah, it's very hard not to be impressed with the stat line. And anyone who didn't see the game and just looks at the stat line, their first reactions will be, wow, this guy is phenomenal, had a great game. And he is phenomenal, but he by no means had a great game. He was responsible for involved in 3 Bengals turnovers. I think a couple of those are excusable. The one where it hit him right in the hands and it bounced off and the safety came in and got the interception. That one is totally him. And I know it's rainy, but if you're an elite receiver, one of the top few in the game, and the ball hits you right in the bread basket, you
got to make that catch. You got to make that catch.
Yeah, and everyone in the stadium kind of had the same thought. Like, how? Oh my gosh! Like, how do you, lose that one? The other 2, I think, were he was involved, but I think the one interception was clearly Dalton. It was a very bad throw. It was behind. It was one of these ones where he had him and tried it, and he barely got his hands on it because it was kind of a very errant pass. Some days he probably, wasn't rain, he probably makes a circus catch and brings that one in. With the wet ball, with the downpour coming down, he wasn't able to pull it in. And if the ball had been a little closer, probably catches it too. But because it was a very bad pass that he was able to get his hands on, it gets tipped up and then comes interception. The fumble, you watch the replay. That one, I don't know if you could hear it through the television. Probably 5 minutes of solid.
He got popped. He got popped.
Yeah, there were 5 minutes of solid boos in that stadium after they showed the replay over and over.
Really?
Fans were irate at the refs for that because the guy came in, led with the helmet, hit him in the back of the head with it was hard to tell if it was the forearm or the helmet, but he lowered his helmet to make helmet-to-helmet contact on him. Led with the helmet, and then he kind of like this. You couldn't tell in the replay if it was the forearm or if it was the head, but it was definitely leading with the helmet. One of those plays that, if Burfict made, he'd have been suspended for 3 weeks. So that led to a lot of angry fans. And rightly so when you saw the replay. They showed it on the big screen a few times. So it's very hard to – he fumbled it, but, when you have someone diving for the back of your head, and, it's almost kind of like the Giovanni Bernard fumble back in the playoff game against the Steelers where, Ryan Shazier led with the helmet, knocked the ball. It should have been flagged, and if this play had been flagged for unnecessary roughness or whatever, then obviously it wouldn't have been a fumble. So I think 2 of the 3, I think there's a reason. I think the one was Dalton. I think the other one was a missed call by the refs. And I haven't followed up to see if the guy who hit him received any penalty from the NFL or not. But
yeah, it was Lorenzo
it's
Alexander.
Impossible. Yeah, it's impossible to look at that replay and think that there's no way he shouldn't get something. Because Burfict will.
Yes, and he was actually dangerously close a couple of times, old number 55, to getting a couple of flags, some of which would have been just because he's Vontaze Burfict, and some of which were because that he was dangerously close to crossing the line that he crosses so many other times. So, I for AJ Green, great statistical game, definitely helped out with the win with the big touchdown, a lot of yards, made some other great catches, but a lot of errors as well. Some not on his hands, some are. Regardless, the Bengals came away with the win. The thing why I wanted to bring that up is because these are the types of things. The Bengals lost a turnover margin. I think the Buffalo had 3 turnovers. The Bengals had 1. These are the types of things that cannot sustain a winning season as it goes on. The Bengals need to be better with the football. They need to do the little things more, just better. And it's not something that's a forte under Marvin Lewis, but regardless of the weather, regardless of the turnovers, some of the errors by their biggest stars, they came away with a win, and one that they needed big time for the rest of the 2017 season. Obviously, they go into the bye this week. They have the Steelers after that. A couple of other very interesting games after that. Colts, Titans, Jaguars, Broncos, a lot of different games that are very interesting down the stretch after the Steelers game. And I think that meat of the schedule, that middle part of the schedule, could go a long way into how the rest of their season plays out because of their early stumble. But hey, they got 2 wins in a row. They're playing better football. That's kind of all that we can ask for at this point. Hopefully they start to correct some things during the bye. Scott, for this next – yeah, go for it.
Say one thing they need to correct is tight ends converting third downs. That was probably their thing from the game, very frustrating. I think we had 7 completions to Charles Clay. We gave up our first down. And you watch that game, and most times they were wide open. On assignment, because I can't imagine Nick O'Leary is that good. Because options and yards he's had in the game, and a first down, 3rd and 5, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12. Completion. You hear on the on the PA, completion and Nick O'Leary first down. Like, man, that's on every single drive. So that's the other thing I think they definitely need to cover.
Yep, and you cut out a tiny bit there, Scott, but I got the gist of what you're saying. I think our listeners did too. Obviously, the covering of tight ends is an issue, and Charles Clay, a guy who's been one of their biggest playmakers, was a guy who had a couple of nice catches. Unfortunately for the Bills, and just in general, left the game with what looked like to be a severe knee injury. Then Nick O'Leary stepped up, and honestly, the Bengals do a pretty good job of locking down your top receiver, your top couple of receivers. It's the backs and the tight ends that seem to not be their strong point on defense. For all of the good things they do on defense, rush the passer, pretty good against stopping the run, locking down top receivers. Those guys, those ancillary weapons, are the guys that tend to make plays against them. McCoy had kind of a lot of catches and different plays that he was involved in. But you know what? They kept everything in front of them, aside from one great Brandon Tate catch, which, by the way, that was interesting. Brandon Tate had probably one of the games of his life against the Bengals, but whatever. So the Bengals defense did more than their fair share of the job to get the Bengals the win against the Bills, and it was a much-needed one. Before we move on to a segment I'm going to let Scott take the reins on, my esteemed co-host has reminded me that, for those of you who do not know, just kind of a little tidbit of news, the Bengals-Steelers game in Week 7 after this bye week has been flexed to the afternoon. It's been flexed to 4:25 Eastern, not the 1 p.m. Eastern start time. So probably if the Bengals did not win this game, and those records were so close, this probably would not have been moved out of, the early portion of the day and into the afternoon. But thanks, Scott, for reminding me about that. That was another big piece of news, well, semi-big piece of news that came across today, along with the Tyler Eifert stuff. Scott, I'm going to let you take the controls here, buddy. You do a weekly feature on CincyJungle.com that is, you call it Behind Enemy Lines, and you ask a series of questions to an editor of the opposition on the SB Nation site. So, for instance, for last week, you spoke to actually the gentleman who came on our show. So you kind of ask a series of questions, give some good insight, especially for those teams that the Bengals don't see very often. Now, for this week, you've decided to put me on the hot seat, I believe, with a couple of questions, and to kind of go, if the Bengals are their own worst enemy, then we are going behind enemy lines, right?
Yeah, and it's something where each week we try to get a better feel for the other teams, because obviously we're following the Bengals. We're not following the Colts or Steelers or Titans, as close as we do the Bengals. So it's kind of a way to look at those teams and see them. Well, obviously this week we're playing the bye week, so there's really no one to look at, as far as an opponent. So why not look inward and see, okay, after 5 weeks, assess the Bengals, and what are things that we should be looking at as far as Bengals fans going into the bye week and stepping out of the bye week. So I have some questions for you, and I'll just ask them. I'll ask one at a time. You can answer them, and we'll see how long this takes us. And from there, so the first one I'll ask is the offensive line. To be shuffling pieces, around the offensive line, especially at tackle, with Fisher and Abuehi and Andre Smith and so forth. And they seem to be trying to find a combination to see, who can need to do to get some sort of running lane, so his running backs get more than 2 or 3 yards of carry. So, with that being said, going forward, you look at what would you do? What would you see as the best strategy, the scheme, whatever, as far as the offensive line?
I'm not a fan of for right now, the rotation, especially with Andre Smith playing both tackles, it's working. I don't think it's working better than what we saw earlier in the season, because obviously the Bengals weren't running the ball and they were a mess, especially against Baltimore. Getting Andre Smith in that offensive line is something that needed to happen in one form or another, but they're moving things around, and I guess in one sense it keeps a defense on its heels, where you see one guy and that doesn't necessarily scream, oh, run to Joe Mixon or deep pass to AJ Green. But I'm worried about Jake Fisher. I'm worried about Cedric Abuehi. Andre Smith, he's not a great NFL left tackle, but he's doing an okay job over there for a position that he never has really played at the NFL level. He's obviously better on the right side. I wish the Bengals had some form of a semblance of, look, this is who we're going with. Let's go forward. Now, you saw, if you remember back in 2009, Scott, there was the whole Nate Livings, Evan Mathis thing at left guard. And everybody, at least from the outside of the organization, could see that Evan Mathis was by far the more superior player. And it's obvious when he left the Bengals, he made multiple Pro Bowls, and Nate Livings did not. I wish there was a way the Bengals could say, these are our 5 guys. And I wish that Andre Smith would be one of them. Unfortunately, I just don't think they trust anybody fully at all right now. And what's weird is the 2 guys they trust the most is Andre Smith and Russell Bodine. And Russell Bodine has been one of the most maligned guys on the Bengals for quite some time. So I like that they recognize the fact that there are weaknesses on this line, and they got their most tenured guy, probably their best offensive lineman, in there to kind of plug the holes that are going on there. But as I told you earlier, I just don't think it's a sustainable type of approach. I think, you drafted Christian Westerman for a reason. You drafted all these other guys for reasons, and you're not playing them. Obviously, TJ Johnson isn't getting it done. Heck, he stepped on his own quarterback's ankle last week and hurt him. So, I mean, you got to figure this out. Andre Smith has got to be in that equation. While I'm happy that they figured out something on the offensive line, I'm not a fan of this big rotation, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I'd say it's a very good answer. I'm interested in looking at some of the comments in the YouTube chat. I think some people agree with you, some disagree with you. So we'll see if we can get some more agreement and disagreement, with the next question being a two-parter. This one being an over-under. So looking at offense again, with offensive line, now we're moving to the skill positions. John Ross, first-round pick, obviously has only played like one snap the first 5 games.
I think just.
And then he got benched, and we've not seen him since.
Right.
So first question, over under John Ross playing 7.5 games this season. And then you can give a reason why.
I'm going barely over. And I'm saying barely over because I think it's going to be 8 games. He's already got 1 under his belt. They've got 11 to play. So, and they're going to the bye. Now, I was hopeful that the Bengals would use this bye week, and all of a sudden, you get back Tyler Eifert full strength, you get back John Ross full strength, and all of a sudden Bill Lazor has all of these weapons that are, at his disposal. Doesn't seem to be happening, at least not with Eifert. We may need to see Ross even sit further past the bye. We'll see. I don't know. It's a little concerning that it seems to be the same injury he suffered in the preseason on kind of a useless carry. We all knew he was also kind of a guy that was injury prone. I still think somehow he gets in there towards the late part of the year. Potentially the Bengals continue to rest him, and they say, hey, we're okay right now, but down the stretch we need you, and that's where they use him there. But I think he barely plays half the games this year. In terms of the second question was
and that one I haven't asked yet, but I will.
Okay, go for
it. Joe Mixon finishing with more or less than 800 rushing yards this season.
Under, for sure under. And I say that not because I want to believe it, but he's through 5 games already. He has under 200 yards. Unless this bye week brings a sense to Bill Lazor to say, look, we got to get this guy 20 to 25, if not more, carries, as well as 30 total touches. I think that I think it's under, and it's not just the carries; it's the offensive line issues. He's got, I mentioned it earlier in the show, he's got 2.8 yards per carry this year. That's not getting it done, and I know, as some folks have pointed out in the YouTube chat, I know that it's not all of his fault. In fact, very little of it is his fault. But he is a guy that we talked about when he was drafted. Was a guy that you could put him behind a subpar offensive line and he creates things. He's got that patience, that vision, that Le'Veon Bell type of playmaking ability. And we have seen some of it. He's broken tackles where probably Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard would have been tackled. He's converted first downs that have been impressive, but he still has yet to make a big play, a long run, a big play. I mean, he's had a couple of nice plays, but I mean, heck, the Bengals' longest run against Buffalo was by him, but it was 12 yards. So you can't get significant yardage if you're not getting the lion's share of the carries, which he has been in recent weeks, but kind of barely, as well as breaking off big plays, which just hasn't been happening because of blocking and other issues. So I say under for that one.
Okay, and then last question I'll throw at you on our questions, I guess, inside the enemy lines and not behind them, or I don't know.
There you
Whatever,
go. I like
however
that.
you order
Inside it. Yeah, I like that. I like that.
So they barely are in the playoff hunt right now. You can, on one side you can say, hey, they're emerging. They've won 2 in a row. They almost beat Green Bay. They beat a 3-1 team. Things are getting better. On the other hand, you can say, okay, this team should have been 4-1. Most optimistic folks would have said they should be 4-1 right now, not 2-3. It's hard to overcome that, especially since the first part of your schedule is the easy part. You have a losing record. How are you going to get better, without improving the pieces on the field? So that being said, with 11 games to go, what do you predict for their final record? And more importantly, do they make the playoffs?
Not to call you out, buddy, but you took a week off a few months ago, and I had Rebecca Toback, the former site manager of CincyJungle.com, on, and we went through, it was right after the schedule release, and we went through, and I think I had about 9 or 10 wins at that point overall for the Bengals. She had, I think, 10 or 11. I kind of want to stick to that 9-win area, even what we saw earlier in the season, and even with the Eifert injury and some of the tough games that are coming up. But it wouldn't surprise me if this was a patented 8-8 Marvin Lewis type of season. If this team just kind of, maybe loses some of the games that are, the Pittsburghs, another Baltimore loss. So, some of these against some of the better NFL teams, and they're competitive and whatever, but they get to 7 or 8 wins. But part of me thinks if things fall their way, if they really, really correct some things over this bye week, if John Ross comes back at some point this season and can contribute in some way, I think they can get to that 9-7 mark and potentially sneak into a wild card. The AFC is not very strong this year. Really, the strongest team is the Kansas City Chiefs at this point. The New England Patriots have shown their warts. The AFC West has had some injuries and other issues going on there, behind the Chiefs, that is. AFC South, now all of a sudden the Texans don't have Whitney Merciless or J.J. Watt for the rest of the year. Marcus Mariota's been going to be out for about a month for the Titans. Jaguars are great on defense, can't do anything on offense. And then the NFC North, other teams that the Bengals play, the Vikings are a mess at quarterback once again. The Lions play great one week, play awful another. So you kind of look at these things, and if you see things fall the right way, you can see a 7-4 finish for the Bengals. Maybe a split with the Ravens and the Steelers. You win, those 2 games. You do well against some of the rest of the NFC North that you've got on your schedule. The Bears are a mess. The Lions, as I already mentioned them, and the Vikings, if you maybe go 2-1, 3-0 there, you've got another game against the struggling Browns. That should be a win. The stretch I worry about is a 3-game stretch of 3 straight away games, and it's at Jacksonville, at Tennessee, and at Denver. And if you can go 2-1 in that stretch, if not 3-0, which would be incredible, but if you can get 2 wins out of those games, I think that's going to say a lot about the Bengals, especially if they win this next game against the Steelers. If you go Steelers, and then I believe the game after that is you host the Colts, which I think very well could be, if not should be, a win. Then you've got those 3 games there. If you can get out of those 5 games at 4-1, I think you're sitting pretty, and I think you can get to that 9-7 mark and make the playoffs. A lot of things have to fall their way. This is also the thing that I wanted to mention is this is a young team, and young teams tend to get a lot better as the year progresses because guys get their NFL legs under them. They get used to the speed. Coaches know how to better utilize guys, that sort of thing. So I think we'll see more of a hot streak towards the middle/end of the season. I waver between this being like a 7-win season now because of the start, or if it's a 9-win season plus a wild card now. We'll see.
I guess I'm muted again. Overall, very good answers. And if you ever write for someone other than the Bengals, then I'll make sure to make you my contact for that site.
So where can they find this and when? Where can they find this post and when?
The Behind Enemy Lines series is on cincyjungle.com, and I think it also is posted on my Twitter, which I think I access a couple times a year. I think it goes out Thursdays. I think Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon. So if they check the site, they can find and there were additional questions. So this is kind of a teaser or a trailer that, hey, there were more questions we asked Anthony. That we have these beautiful, well-written responses, proper grammar and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
not the ums that Chris Berrien has pointed out to me in the YouTube chat. So shout out to old Chris Berrien with the ums, and I'm sorry that that offends you, my friend.
I'll go back and add those in.
Yeah, I got to think on my feet. So sometimes you stall. I mean, it kind of is what it is. Scott, it's been a couple of really almost since the early part of the season. And thank you, my friend, for those questions. Those were very good ones and very well thought out, as they always are in that segment. Gosh, we are just really patting each other on the back, buddy. I love it. I want to talk about fantasy football, and it's not just the Bengals fantasy football. It's not just, what is AJ Green going to do this week or what have you, but there are significant NFL fantasy football questions going on right now around the league. Almost everybody that follows, I don't have the stats, but vast majority of people who follow NFL football play fantasy football. You are our resident fantasy expert, so I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, both in what's going on around the league, as well as maybe some Bengals questions and some from our live listeners. So if you're tuning in live via YouTube or at cincyjungle.com, which we appreciate, leave a fantasy football question, especially over the next couple of minutes. We'll try and get to that. This is kind of, I don't want to say it's rapid fire, but maybe, a minute or so each question, and we'll try and go from there. And I'm going to try and get you off balance a little bit with some of these questions. Scott, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So the first one I want to ask you is about Adrian Peterson. Now, Adrian Peterson was on the Saints. Some people thought he'd have a great season. Some people thought he'd be okay because he'd be splitting time, which was known when he went there. Obviously, they drafted Alvin Kamara. He was very dissatisfied with his role there. Whatever happened. He got traded to the Cardinals, who lost David Johnson earlier this year, who was probably the majority of fantasy football players who had a number one pick drafted him first overall. So how do you see Adrian Peterson's impact going with the Cardinals going forward? Or is he just simply, he's older, he's washed up, he's really relying on his previous years and his Hall of Fame status?
As far as Adrian Peterson going to the Cardinals, it definitely helps his stock as far as fantasy goes because he's going to get the opportunities. Now, if you're looking for a David Johnson replacement, unfortunately, you're not going to get that. And the main reason is David Johnson gets a very disproportionate percentage of his yardage through the air. Something like 43% of his yards since being drafted are receiving yards. And that's just not Adrian Peterson's game. That's not how the Cardinals are going to use him. They are going to use him in the role that Chris Johnson had, which is Adrian Peterson's going to be our first down, second down guy. We have Andre Ellington, who's proven he's a very effective third down back, a very effective receiver. So what you're going to get is a split where Adrian Peterson's getting the rushes and Andre Ellington's getting the receptions. So what you've been getting from Ellington, you're probably going to continue to get from him. What you're getting from Adrian Peterson is going to be more than what you got from him in New Orleans. Probably a little better than Chris Johnson if you think he's better than Chris Johnson, but he's also a 32-year running back who has averaged 2.5 yards a carry the last 2 years. So it's not like, they're plugging in, 25-year-old Adrian Peterson. So
right.
I would say you could expect more than he gave you if he's on your fantasy team than what he gave you in New Orleans, just because he's going to get more rushes. And he's probably going to get the goal line looks. But unfortunately, if you have David Johnson and you're just desperate for something because you used your first overall pick for this guy and he's done nothing since week 1, if you're expecting Adrian Peterson to step in and be that guy, that replacement, he might be a decent flex. But if you're looking for more than that, unfortunately, he's probably not the right answer.
So if you have, say, average to above average running backs in your stable and on your fantasy football team, is Adrian Peterson worth a flex play, a RB2 play at this point, or no?
I think it really depends on who you have and if you're in a PPR or not, because he's probably not going to get the receptions. If you're in a PPR and you have decent options, I'd grab him if he's still available. I don't know if I'm confident enough in playing him yet. But then again, with all the injuries, it just depends on who you have. I mean, some people are very desperate at this point, and you just need a running back who's healthy, who's going to get more than 5 or 10 carries. I mean, if you're running with someone like Paul Perkins or Orleans Darkwa, yeah, Peterson to step up. If you've got Todd Gurley and Kareem Hunt and Carlos Hyde and these people in your lineup, then okay, Peterson's definitely sitting on your bench.
Yep. Couple of people in the YouTube chat have mentioned it, and I am an inquiring mind as well. Big Ben obviously is a guy, especially last year and the year before, with all of the weapons. He puts up big numbers, big stats. Obviously coming off a 5-interception game, really struggling this year, as is the entire offense, really. Do you expect a bounce back, or do you expect, and of course in typical Big Ben fashion, he was very dramatic at the end of the loss against the Jaguars, saying, maybe I don't have it anymore. But do you really believe that, or do you think that maybe it's true? Maybe he just is a guy that is top 15 in the league in terms of fantasy football points. He's got a lot of weapons, man, but it's not looking good so far.
Yeah, I'd say he's definitely going to bounce back, but the question is bounce back to what? If you look at his fantasy numbers as far as quarterbacks go, in 2015, he was the 21st overall quarterback. 2016, he was the 18th overall quarterback. So, and this year is projected to be about the same, a decent backup quarterback. That being said, obviously last year he was horrible. I mean, last week he had the 5 interceptions. And if your starter is someone like Carr or Mariota and they're out this week and you need a starter and Roethlisberger is your backup, I think you can probably be confident that he's not going to have another 5 picks. I mean, you look at Andy Dalton. Week 1, he had 5 turnovers, had a horrible season, horrible game. Since then, he's obviously been better. He hasn't been, Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, but he has been better. So I think you can look at the Big Ben game and say, yeah, that was his just awful game. Everyone's going to have one. That was his. That's not going to be him going forward. He's not going to have 5 turnovers this week, next week. But even though he bounces back and he does have all his weapons, because he doesn't run much, he's not a guy who's done very much on the ground over the last 4 or 5 years. He's not really going to get you a whole lot of production, and there are better options. So he'll bounce back, but he'll bounce back to be a decent, good backup that you may need to use as a starter now and then. But if you're expecting him to be your starter throughout the season, yeah, you might have issues.
Okay. I'm going to end on this one just because of the sake of time. And this is actually, and let's just talk about this trade scenario, okay? Someone has Todd Gurley, and they have, good Lord, the Saints receiver. I had this in front of me.
Michael Thomas.
That's the one. Yeah, that guy. I was going to say Michael Johnson, and I'm going, wait, no, that's not right. So, Saints receiver Michael. You just said it. I just totally forgot. Thomas. Michael Thomas. Let's try this one again. Saints receiver Michael Thomas and Rams running back Todd Gurley. And this has a kind of a Bengals slant here, Bengals receiver A.J. Green and running back Christian McCaffrey in a non-PPR league. So obviously that affects McCaffrey a bit more that way. But non-PPR league, again, Michael Thomas, Saints receiver, and Todd Gurley, Rams running back, for A.J. Green and Christian McCaffrey in a trade in a non-PPR league. Does something like that make sense?
It depends on who's getting what, but for me, that is a horribly lopsided trade. And if you're giving me Gurley and Thomas for Green and McCaffrey, I'm taking that 10 times out of 10 without giving it a second thought. And the reasoning is Green is obviously an elite receiver. He's a top, 4 or 5. He's going to get a lot of targets. Thomas is also a very good receiver. He's not A.J. Green, but he's in a team that throws a lot, has a bad defense, has to throw a lot. He's going to be a producer. He was a top 10 guy last year. He's going to finish as a top 10 or 15 guy this year. McCaffrey is nothing more than a backup running back on his own team, let alone fantasy. He's currently the 32nd best scoring fantasy back. That kind of puts him as a low, RB3 flex guy, pretty much scoring the same as Giovanni Bernard. And that's kind of what we were expecting going into fantasy drafts. The Panthers had said as much. He was going to be the backup to James Stewart or Jonathan Stewart. Stewart's the primary back. Stewart and Newton are going to get all the rushing touchdowns. McCaffrey's going to get a few receptions. In a PPR, he makes a little more sense. In a non-PPR, he really doesn't have any value as a starter on your team. Then you look at someone like Gurley. Gurley, 2 years ago, was phenomenal. He finished third in the NFL in points per game as far as fantasy running backs. Last year was obviously horrible. The team was horrible. We saw how horrible they were on the Amazon show. Jeff Fisher, we're not going to go 8-8 team. It's horrendous. This year it's been fixed. They have a better offense. They have better receivers. They have a quarterback who's in his second year in the system. They fixed the O-line. They stole Andrew Whitworth from us. They have time to throw. They have blocking lanes. They have, an offense that seems to be doing everything right. So I fully expect Gurley to return to his 2015 numbers. And just as a side note, I have him in all my fantasy leagues because I expected him to return to those numbers, and he seems to be doing that. So if you're giving me, a guy who should probably have finished the top 5 running back receiver for a great receiver and a backup running back, to me, there's no question. I would take the Gurley and Green. I'm sorry, the Gurley and Thomas McCaffrey without question.
So Gurley and Thomas over McCaffrey and Green.
Yes, I would say miles ahead if you gave me that choice.
Okay, good to know. This has been the Fantasy Football Insider with Scott Schulze on the Orange and Black Insider. Thanks, Scott. Some of it was user questions. Some of it was just kind of general questions based on what's going on around the league. Good stuff. We appreciate it. It's been too long since we've done this. I guess we've kind of been in a little bit of a tailspin since the Bengals started 0-3, but now they're going into the bye week, and you're kind of getting into the meat of your fantasy football schedule as well. And this is kind of where a lot of people make trades, do waiver wire additions, and do a lot of different things in order to get to their fantasy football playoffs. And we appreciate your insight, buddy. This is the Orange and Black. Go ahead, buddy. You had another thought.
No, I was just going to, you're patting me on the back some more. So I have to reach it.
High five, buddy. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, and I'm joined by my co-host Scott Schulze. I appreciate the insight from him, as well as all of the live listeners that we have on our YouTube channel, as well as at cincyjungle.com, some of which are stirring the pot a little bit at this point in the YouTube chat, but that's okay. That's kind of what the point is of having a live YouTube chat. If that's what you want to do and that's who you want to be, that's fine. You can get this program on iTunes, on SoundCloud, on cincyjungle.com, as well as by subscribing to our YouTube channel and getting the videos there. And you can get in touch with the program on Twitter at BengalsOBI, via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you, even if you are one of those guys in the chat room that's, I don't want to say trolling, but stirring the pot, I guess, is the proper word there. I've got one. Apparently, you've got a couple. You saw a couple of fan questions earlier. I do, Scott. I do want to get to those. I want to get to this one first, and then let's get out of here because we're going a little long yet again. Shocker. We received an email from listener Marcus Drum. And I got to give him credit because this has taken quite a bit of research and well, I don't know about quite a bit, but a decent amount of research to look at it, and I thought it was pretty insightful. And now this was sent to us after last week's game, so this doesn't take into account this week's game, but essentially through 4 games, Joe Mixon has played 103 offensive snaps. He has 52 carries, been targeted 11 times in the passing game. That has changed, obviously, but the fact remains, as I said earlier, Joe Mixon has a 2.8 yards per carry average this year on the ground, and he's done some decent things in the passing game, but nothing to truly write home about, I guess. He had the nice 10-yard touchdown run this last week. Obviously had to fight off a number of defenders to get there. We know the issues at this point. Marcus talks about essentially he gets the ball over 60% of the time at this point when he's in the game. And I think that that might have gone up with the Bills game because he had some significant touches there. How can the Bengals expect him to succeed when the opposing defense knows he's getting the ball virtually all the time or most of the time when he's in the lineup? It's a great question. I don't know if I have a true answer for it. It also makes it more convoluted with the offensive line situation. So your thoughts on this question, Scott?
Yeah, well, the thing you said about the offensive line, I think, is the key. The fact that, most teams can pressure the Bengals passing game with just their front four. I mean, you don't have to blitz. And when you don't have to blitz, you don't have to play coverage. You can play the run. And when Mixon's in there, more often than not, it is a running play. Just like when, Jeremy Hill's in there. There's the occasional passing play, but because Dalton's struggling, you can play just single coverage and you kind of figure, okay, we're going to get to him before he gets the ball off. If not, he's going to miss on his pass. So, yeah, it's a good question because there's not a good answer to it. I mean, the answer is you have to have a better passing game so that when Mixon's in there, teams aren't keying on him. Because you look at, the other great running backs in the league, when Le'Veon Bell's in there, he's getting the ball. When David Johnson's is there, he's getting the ball. When, Peterson, LaShawn McCoy, so forth. When those guys are in there, they're getting the ball, but yet they're able to do something with it. So when Mixon's in there, you have to assume he's getting the ball. Same with, when Hill's in there, it's a running play. He's getting the ball. And when Bernard's in there, it's third down. They're going to give him a little dump off for a screen or a draw play. And the defense can play accordingly. So I think the biggest thing is just being able to, find some way to block these people. So, you got to get the passing game going. You can't have the interceptions, the turnovers. You have to be able to protect Dalton so he's not getting sacked all the time. So you're forcing teams to play a little deeper. You're forcing teams to play more pass coverage, and you don't have all the guys in the box that you can actually, get some sort of running space for Joe Mixon when he gets the ball. That being said, there looks like we lost Anthony briefly. And I saw people on YouTube chat talking about the Ohio internet. Maybe it's the California internet right now. So that being said, there were a couple questions I wanted to get to. First one was from Chris Berrien, who Anthony mentioned. It was, Scott, do you think we will draft a tight end or offensive line next year? I know it's early to ask. The answer is yes. It's very early to ask. And unfortunately, because the Bengals tend to go best player available, we really don't know. But that's assuming Marvin Lewis will still be the coach next year, which, based on how the season goes, we have no idea if he will be the head coach. He may or may not. That being said, I think tight end is probably the question. I think it's got to be left tackle or even quarterback because Dalton only has a few years left. He's clearly been struggling this year. He is getting up there in age. I mean, he's obviously not 40, but he tends to be having some issues with his accuracy. His deep ball passing has regressed a little bit. So I'd say offensive line or quarterback if it was up to me, because I think they have all the pieces on defense they need. Then second question I will get to, and I'll turn it over to Anthony, and we'll kind of go from there. Lucas Leonard asked, how awesome is Metallica? And I want to answer that question with a question. It really depends on which Metallica you mean. Do you mean the pre-Black album Metallica or the new, Bob Ross produced Metallica? Because you get a very different answer depending on which Metallica you mean. So, yeah, I think we need more clarification before we can give that an accurate answer. So that was what I had, Anthony. And it looks like you're back.
So full disclosure, Lucas Leonard is actually a high school friend of mine, a great high school friend of mine. So there's a couple of people who have decided to join the live YouTube chat, and I welcome them, who are all high school friends of mine, and they have been stirring. Those are the folks I was mentioning as pot stirrers. So Lucas has been a big Metallica fan. I've been friends with Lucas Leonard for like 20 years, literally. I'm not kidding. So it's really funny that he wants to ask that question. I have never been a big fan of Metallica at all. I just haven't. And it's not that I don't like hard rock. It's not that I don't like, I just have not been a Metallica fan. I know they have talent. I know they've had great success. I know that they have an avid fan base. I'm probably going to catch a lot of hate by saying that. I've never been a big Metallica guy. But thanks for the question, Lucas, and thanks for tuning in, buddy. What about you, Scott?
Oh, if we're talking,
I mean, you kind of had some semantics there. You kind of had some like, is it this or is it this or is it which one are we talking about? So, but in general, overall, you seem to have, and you are a current and or former musician yourself, are you not?
Correct. Yeah, I
okay.
Played guitar in a rock band years back, but obviously nothing as big as Metallica. But that being said, if the question were asked to me, I would say if we're talking the pre-Black Album, so Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, those things, and Justice for All, I would say very awesome, because when I was that age, I was a huge Metallica fan, saw them several times live in concert. Was a big fan during that era. I really wasn't too much of a fan of anything that came out after the Black Album. Kind of stopped listening to them after whatever those Loaded, Reloaded, whatever that stuff was. Really liked the old stuff. So I'll say was awesome and then became less awesome. I've heard some people like the newer stuff. I have not gotten back into them because after that middle, it's kind of like Star Wars. Like the original Star Wars were pretty awesome. Episode 1, 2, and 3 were just total garbage, but they had their good qualities, but weren't as good. So, I'll say I just, and some people may not be watching the new Star Wars because they were so turned off by Jar Jar and young Anakin and, that horrible acting in the prequels. But so my answer from the Metallica is Star Wars.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, you, my friend, have just upped our listenership in unbelievable amounts, talking Metallica, talking Star Wars. It's unbelievable. But, I will say the one song, Master of Puppets, my fondest memory of that song, if I guess I could have a memory of that song, is in the movie Old School. If you have ever seen that movie, when they are kidnapping some of their new fraternity brothers in a black van. And if you haven't seen the scene, go watch it. And they're blasting Master of Puppets. It's a pretty funny scene. Old School, classic movie. Anyways, I guess we'll end it on that, buddy. I mean, we've had some fun. We've had some different questions. We've had quite a few entertaining people in our live YouTube chat. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for tuning in via YouTube, via Cincy Jungle. Thanks for downloading the program. If you are able to, usually we record Wednesday nights. If you're able to join us, please do. We love interacting with you, answering your questions on the air, and talking Bengals with you. So please join us every episode if you are able. If not, all of our content is available on YouTube, on SoundCloud, on iTunes, and at cincyjungle.com. Scott, any final thoughts before we bounce out, buddy?
Yeah, since we are kind of all over the place, just one additional off the wall thing I'll bring up. Since we brought up Tyler Eifert earlier, he went to Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a Catholic school. He may be Catholic, I don't know. Doesn't really matter. There is a Catholic healing shrine in Lourdes, France, where people have gone. They've had miraculous healings, sight restored, healed of all sorts of conditions. He's a very currently injured guy. Can we spend, as a team, not we, but if the Bengals, can they spend some money? He went to a college named after, Our Lady, Notre Dame, St. Mary, to a shrine of St. Mary in France, and see if that heals him. I mean, nothing else seems to be working. I would like to volunteer that Mike Brown, Marvin Lewis at least consider doing that. So that's what I'm going to end it on.
I have no idea how to follow that one, buddy. I have no idea how to follow that one on the get out. But I think I followed where you were going with that. But I don't know if I have an idea as to where to go with that, except for the fact that I can say the Bengals have won 2 straight. They had a nice win last week. They've got some unfortunate news this week with Tyler Eifert. For all of the breaking news, analysis, and everything about the Bengals, even through the bye week, go check out cincyjungle.com. Check out this channel. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for the Orange and Black Insider, as well as subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud as well. We appreciate the support. We love hearing from you week in, week out, even when things are at their bleakest right now. Things are on the uptick, so that's good. Thank you to all the new listeners. And all of the people that tuned in live that are new this week. I saw a lot of new faces, and I know who a lot of those new faces are, fortunately and unfortunately. But at any rate, thanks for tuning in. This has been the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza for Scott Schulze. We'll see you next time.